I went camping alone, and someone left something outside my tent while I was still inside. Earlier this February, I went up on my own to a place called Blackthorn Mere, just beyond the Kielder side of the border. I'd found it through one of those dead little forum threads nobody updates anymore, where people talk about wild camping spots in a vague way, like they don't want to say too much in case the place gets ruined. There were only 2 replies under it, both years old, and one of them just said, "Quiet if you can find it." At the time, that sounded perfect to me. I honestly thought a couple of nights on my own, away from everyone and everything, was exactly what I needed. It had been a rotten start to the year. Nothing dramatic in the sort of way people would make a fuss over, but enough to wear me down. My relationship had ended in that slow, embarrassing way where nobody does anything spectacularly awful, but by the end of it, you still feel like someone's quietly taken a hammer to your insides. Work had been relentless. I was sleeping badly. Even stupid little things were getting to me, like the sound of the neighbor's tumble dryer through the wall, or the bloke across the road who seemed to start his van every morning at 5:30 and just leave it idling. So I packed the car on a Thursday, told my sister I'd probably have patchy signal and not to worry if I was quiet for a day or two, and drove north with the heater on full and a flask of tea in the cup holder, convinced some cold air and silence would sort my head out. The track down to the Mere was worse than I expected. Proper muddy, rutted, with branches scraping along both sides of the car. There wasn't a sign for it, not a proper one anyway, just a bent wooden post half sunk into the verge about a mile back, painted once in green and now mostly gray with weather. I nearly missed the turning and had to reverse back between 2 dry stone walls with my heart in my mouth because I thought I'd take the mirrors off. It was that sort of road where if anything came the other way, one of you would have to make a decision you didn't want to make. By the time I got there, it was just after 4, already getting dim in that heavy winter way where the day seems to fold in on itself without much warning. The Mere wasn't big, not like Kielder water or anything like that. It was more like a dark sheet laid out between the trees, flat and still, except for the reeds at the edges where the wind kept worrying at them. The bank on the near side was mostly rough grass and old stone, with a bit of open ground that looked just big enough to pitch on. Beyond that, it was birch and spruce all the way round, close packed and black in places where the light didn't get through. It should have felt peaceful. It mostly did. But there was something about it I didn't like straight off, and at first I couldn't have told you why. Maybe it was how quiet it was. I know people always say that about places in the middle of nowhere, but this was a bit different. Usually you still get something, don't you? Wind in branches, birds, water against the bank, distant traffic if the world isn't too far away. Here it felt like the sound was being held down somehow. I could hear my own boots in the wet grass too clearly. When I shut the car door, it cracked across the water so sharply, I actually stopped moving for a second, half expecting someone to shout out at me for disturbing them. No one did. I walked the clearing once with my hands in my coat pockets, just getting the feel of it before I unpacked. There were signs people had camped there before. You could tell from the blackened patch where fires had been, and from a ring of stones near the water that had definitely been arranged by hand. But there was none of the usual mess. No bottle caps, no scorched foil, no snapped pegs or bits of cord. Not even tire tracks fresh enough to suggest anyone had been there lately. It was odd because the place looked used and unused at the same time, as if people came there often, but were very careful about not leaving anything that proved it. I remember crouching by the old fire ring and touching one of the stones. It was cold. Of course it was cold. But I checked anyway, almost without thinking, because some part of me had already started wondering if I was alone. I told myself not to be ridiculous and got on with it. I pitched the tent near the edge of the grass where the ground was flattest and the roots weren't too bad. My hands were stiff with cold by then, and I had to redo one of the corner lines twice because it kept slipping. I made tea, walked down to the water, and stood there with the steam coming up in front of my face, watching the last of the light fade over the far bank. It should have been one of those moments you remember for the right reasons. The sky had that washed out iron color behind the trees, and the mirror itself looked nearly black. For a minute or two, everything did seem fine, like nothing would happen, like I'd come all this way, spooked myself with the silence, and that would be that. Then I saw him. He was on the opposite side, maybe 100 yards away, partly between the birches, just standing there. At first, I thought he might be a post or a bit of broken fencing because he wasn't moving at all. Then the shape shifted, only slightly, enough for me to realize it was a person. A man, I thought, tallish, dark coat, no bright colors, no dog, no rod, no pack that I could make out. He wasn't doing anything. That was the bit that unsettled me. If he'd been walking, fishing, setting up camp, I don't think I would have thought much of it. But he was just there, facing the water. Lowered the mug and stared like an idiot, waiting for him to do something normal. He didn't wave, didn't call over, didn't even seem surprised to see me. He just turned, slowly, and stepped back into the trees. That was enough to put my nerves up a bit, I won't lie. I stood there for another few seconds, looking at the place where he'd been, expecting him to reappear. When he didn't, I went back to the tent and tried to laugh it off to myself. Another camper, obviously. Or a walker. Or maybe someone local cutting across through the woods. There were any number of reasonable explanations. I said all of them out loud, actually, which in hindsight is a bit pathetic, but the sound of my own voice made me feel better. I got the stove going again just to have something warm in my hands and checked my phone, though I knew there wouldn't be any signal. Nothing. Not even one bar teasing me. I sent my sister a message anyway, telling her I was there safe on the off chance it'd go through later. Then I put the phone on airplane mode to save battery and started sorting my things in the tent while there was still enough light to see by. Torch in the side pocket, water bottle by the sleeping bag, car keys zipped into the little mesh compartment near my head, just normal little routines. But I noticed I kept glancing over my shoulder toward the trees as if I expected someone to be standing just outside the doorway. That's the thing people don't always get unless they've camped alone. Once it starts getting dark, every tiny task suddenly feels more important. You begin doing things carefully because you know that in an hour's time, you won't want to step even 2 feet outside the tent unless you absolutely have to. I was halfway through blowing up my sleeping mat when I heard a noise behind me and nearly put my elbow through the side of the tent. It was only footsteps on the grass, slow ones, coming from the track. I froze with the valve still in my hand and listened, not crunching or crashing about, just steady footfalls, unhurried, getting closer. I remember feeling that stupid conflict you get in moments like that, where one half of your brain is saying, "Don't be dramatic, it's just another person," and the other half is already imagining the worst thing it can. "Hello?" A man's voice called out from outside. Friendly enough, a bit muffled by the canvas. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you." I unzipped the tent and leaned out, trying to look more composed than I felt. He was standing about 10 feet away with his hands visible, which I noticed immediately and hated myself for noticing. He looked about 30, maybe a little older, with a dark wool cap pulled low and one of those olive waterproof jackets everybody in the countryside seems to own. Slim build, pale face from the cold. Nothing remarkable about him at all, really. That was probably part of why I didn't tell him to do one straight away. "Sorry," he said again, giving a quick little nod. "Saw your car up the track. Didn't expect anyone else down here." "No, it's fine," I said. "You just made me jump a bit." "Fair enough." He glanced towards the water and then back at me. "I'm Callum, Hannah." He smiled politely at that. But it was one of those smiles that felt practiced somehow, like he knew exactly what expression would put another person at ease. "You camping here on your own then, Hannah?" There was nothing obviously wrong with the question. People ask that sort of thing. Still, hearing it said aloud in a place like that made me oddly aware of how dark it had become and how far my car suddenly felt from anywhere useful. "Just for a couple of nights," I said. "Brave." He looked over my shoulder at the tent. "Gets dead quiet here after dark." I laughed a little because I didn't know what else to do. I'd noticed. Most people don't stay long. He said it casually, almost as if he'd meant to say something else and changed his mind halfway through. Then he gestured vaguely up through the trees. I'm pitched farther along, beyond the rise. Didn't want you thinking you were completely by yourself. That should have reassured me, I suppose. It nearly did. Another camper nearby was better than being utterly alone. But something about the way he said it made the back of my neck tighten. Not the words exactly, more the implication underneath them, as if he decided on my behalf that being alone here was a problem. He asked if I'd found the place easily. I said more or less. He said the track was worse in rain and that last winter someone got stuck so badly they had to leave the vehicle overnight. We talked for maybe 2 minutes in total. Short, ordinary things. Weather, road conditions, how early it gets dark. He was calm, soft-spoken, not pushy. If I'd met him by a pub fire or in a campsite with 10 other people about, I probably would have thought he seemed decent enough. But standing there by the mirror with the trees behind him, there was still that sense of something sitting slightly out of line. Then he looked across the water and said, almost to himself, "No lights tonight." I followed his gaze. "Sorry?" He blinked as if I'd interrupted a thought. "Nothing. Just usually the farm lamps carry if the mist's low. You get reflections." I looked out over the mirror again. There were no farm buildings anywhere I'd passed, no houses either, just the track and miles of woods. I nearly asked him where exactly he meant, but before I could, he'd already shifted the conversation on. "Well," he said, stepping back, "I'll leave you to it. Don't want to hover. If you hear anything odd in the night, it'll just be deer moving through." "Right," I said. He gave me that same small, neat smile. "Or not deer." I actually laughed then, though more out of awkwardness than amusement. "Cheers. That's helpful." He dipped his head like he'd made a joke that perhaps hadn't landed, then turned and walked away toward the track. I watched him go longer than was probably polite. He moved into the dark very quickly, and what bothered me later, what kept coming back to me, was that I never heard him pushing through brambles or stepping over fallen branches. After the first few paces, it was as if the night just took him. I zipped the tent back up and sat still for a while, listening. Nothing. No voice. No footsteps. No rustle from another camp being set up nearby. If he was really pitched beyond the rise, as he'd said, I should have heard something eventually. A zip. A stove. A torch beam moving through the trees. But there was nothing at all. Only the occasional dry tapping sound from the reeds at the shore and the faint tick of my stove cooling down. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I should probably just get back in the car and find a proper campsite or a B&B in one of the villages. That thought came and went in under 10 seconds. It felt embarrassing, over the top. I could already imagine explaining it to someone later and hearing myself sound ridiculous. So instead I made another tea, sat on my folded coat by the dead fire ring, and told myself off for being jumpy. For a while, it worked. The sky darkened properly. The mirror disappeared into one flat black shape. The cold started biting through my jeans, and I gave up on the idea of a fire because the wood round there was all damp and I couldn't be bothered faffing about with it. I had one of those cereal bars from my bag and tried reading a few pages of a paperback by torchlight, but I kept rereading the same paragraph. Every now and then I'd look up and check the far bank without meaning to. Nothing there. After a bit, I went down to the water one last time before bed. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to myself I was settling in. Maybe because I didn't want the evening to end on that twitchy note. The bank was slick, and the reeds brushed against my trousers as I stood at the edge. Across the mere the trees were only shapes, jagged and black, with the faintest pale strip above them where the last of the sky remained. I was just about to turn back when I noticed something on the stones near the shore, a few feet to my left. It was a mug, not mine, an enamel one, white with a blue rim, the sort you get in outdoor shops. It had been placed upright on a flat stone, clean as anything, with no mud splashed on it and no leaves inside. I was sure it hadn't been there earlier. I would have seen it. And even if I somehow hadn't, what bothered me was how deliberate it looked. Not dropped, not forgotten, left. I crouched and touched the side of it, still warm. The cold that went through me at that moment was different from the weather. It was quick and deep and absolute, like my body had understood something before my brain had caught up. I stood up so fast I nearly slipped. then turned full round, staring at the clearing, the trees, the track, every dark patch between them. Nobody was there. I couldn't see anyone. I couldn't hear anyone. But I knew, with that horrible certainty you only get a few times in your life, that I had not been alone by that water as long as I'd thought. I picked up my torch and shone it across the grass toward the bank on the opposite side. And for just a second, before the beam shook off it, I saw the outline of a person standing among the birches again, not moving, watching. I kept the torch on that spot longer than I needed to, like if I held the light steady enough, the shape would resolve into something normal, a tree stump, a broken branch, anything other than what I thought I'd seen. But it didn't. It was a person. Same height, same stillness as before. And this time I knew for certain I hadn't imagined it. I don't think I breathed properly for a few seconds. You get that strange delay where your body hasn't decided what to do yet, whether to run, shout, or pretend none of it's real. I remember thinking, just call out. Just say something normal. So I did. Hello? I said, trying to keep my voice level. Are you all right over there? The words sounded small as soon as they left my mouth. They didn't carry the way I expected. The mirror seemed to swallow them up, flatten them against the water. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, exactly where I'd seen it before, like it had been waiting for me to notice. I told myself it had to be Callum. That made the most sense. He'd said he was camped nearby. Maybe he'd come down to the water. Maybe he was just watching, which when you think about it isn't much better, but it was still something I could explain. Callum? I tried again. Nothing. That was the moment it tipped from uncomfortable into something else entirely. Because even if he hadn't heard me properly the first time, he would have heard his name. Anyone would have. The distance wasn't that far. And even if he hadn't wanted to come over, a wave, a shout, something would have been the normal response. Instead, the figure shifted slightly, just enough for me to notice, and then stepped back into the trees again. Gone. Same as before. I stood there for another second, then two, then realized I was still clutching the mug in my hand. The warmth had already started to fade. I put it back exactly where I'd found it without thinking about why, like touching it any longer might somehow make things worse, then turned and walked, quickly now, back toward the tent. I didn't run. That's the strange thing. I wanted to. Every part of me was telling me to get inside, zip everything shut, and not come back out until morning. But there's that stubborn bit of your brain that doesn't want to look frightened, even when there's no one there to see you. So I walked, a bit faster than normal, trying to keep it controlled, telling myself, you're fine. It's just someone else camping. You're being dramatic. By the time I got to the tent, my hands were shaking enough that I fumbled the zip twice before getting it closed behind me. I switched the torch to its dim setting and sat there for a second, listening. Still nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no sound of anyone moving through the clearing. That silence again. It pressed in on me in a way I hadn't noticed before. Not empty exactly, more like held. Like something was choosing not to make a sound. I pulled my phone out and checked it out of habit. Still no signal. Of course there wasn't. I stared at the screen for a few seconds longer than I needed to, like something might magically appear if I gave it time. Then I locked it and set it beside me. You're overthinking this, I told myself. You've seen one bloke twice. That's it. There's no story here. But then there was the mug. That kept coming back to me. Because if it was Callum's, why hadn't he said anything about it? Why leave it there like that? And more importantly, how long had it been there before I noticed it? Had it been sitting there the entire time I was at the water, just out of my line of sight? Or had someone placed it there while I was standing only a few feet away? I didn't like either answer. I unzipped the inner pocket near my head and checked my keys. Still there. Then my wallet. Still there too. I found myself counting through my things. Torch, spare batteries, lighter, knife. Like I needed to confirm that nothing else had been touched. Everything seemed in place. Exactly how I'd left it. That should have reassured me. It didn't. Because if someone had been close enough to leave that mug by the water without me noticing, then they'd been close enough to do more than that. I sat there for a while, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to pack everything up there and just leave. Get back in the car, drive until I found somewhere with lights and people and noise. But another part of me kept pushing back against that idea, telling me I was letting my imagination run away with itself. It was still early. I'd only been there a few hours. Leaving now would feel like admitting I couldn't handle being on my own for one night. So I stayed. I told myself I'd give it an hour. If I still felt like this after that, I'd go. To make it feel more normal, I unwrapped another cereal bar and forced myself to eat it, even though I wasn't hungry. Then I switched the torch off completely and sat in the dark, letting my eyes adjust. It took a minute or two before I could make out the faint outline of the tent walls, the pale blur of my bag in the corner. Outside, the mirror was invisible now. I lay back on the sleeping mat and pulled the bag over me, leaving the torch within reach by my shoulder. I remember thinking, if you can just get to sleep, everything will feel different in the morning. It's a stupid thought, really, but it's one people cling to when they're unsettled. For a little while, it almost worked. My breathing slowed. The cold eased slightly inside the bag. I started drifting in that half state where your thoughts blur into something softer, less sharp. And then, a sound, soft, close. Not from the trees this time, from just outside the tent. I froze. It wasn't loud. That was the worst part. Just a faint shift like weight pressing down on damp grass. A careful step, not rushed, not clumsy. Someone trying not to be heard. My chest tightened so quickly it actually hurt. I held my breath without meaning to, listening as hard as I could. For a few seconds there was nothing else. Then another step. Slightly to the side this time. Moving around the tent. I reached for the torch but didn't switch it on. I don't know why. Some instinct told me not to give away exactly where I was inside, even though that made no real sense. They obviously already knew. Say something, I thought. Let them know you're awake. But the words wouldn't come. My throat felt dry tight, like it had closed up on me. The footsteps stopped, right by the entrance. I could see the faintest shift in the fabric where the outer flap moved slightly, just enough to let a thread of colder air slip in. Someone was standing there, close enough to touch the zip if they wanted to. For a second, just a second, I honestly thought they were going to open it. Instead, there was a light tap against the canvas. 2 fingers, maybe, gentle, almost polite. I flinched so hard I hit my head against the tent pole. "Hannah?" a voice said quietly from outside. It was Callum, or at least it sounded like him. "You awake?" Something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. Not loud enough for anyone else to hear, just enough for me. I forced myself to answer, even though every instinct was telling me not to. "Yeah," I said, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. "What is it?" There was a pause, long enough that I started wishing I hadn't said anything at all. Then he spoke again, softer this time. "I thought I saw someone down by the water," he said. "Did you go back out there?" For a second, I didn't answer him. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because something in what he just said didn't sit right at all. "I thought I saw someone down by the water." He said it like he'd just arrived, like he'd only just noticed, like he hadn't already been out there, standing exactly where I'd seen him. My mouth felt dry. "No," I said carefully. "I've been in here." Another pause. It stretched just a bit too long to feel natural. "Oh," he said finally, "right." I could hear him shift his weight slightly outside, the faint press of his boots in the grass. I kept my eyes fixed on the tent wall, waiting for his shadow to move. But the darkness inside made everything feel distorted. I couldn't tell where he was standing anymore. "That's strange," he added, almost to himself. A cold prickle ran across my shoulders. "What is?" I asked. "I just thought." He stopped again, then a bit louder. "Never mind. Probably nothing." There it was again, that same tone from earlier, casual on the surface, but like something underneath it hadn't quite been said out loud. I tightened my grip on the torch. "Did you need something?" I asked, trying to sound normal, like this was just a slightly awkward late-night check-in between campers. "No," he said. "Just making sure you were all right." "Right." Another silence. It was unbearable this time, heavy, waiting. I was just about to tell him I was going to sleep, just to end it, when I heard something else. Not from Callum, from farther out. A sound moving through the trees, slow, measured. Another set of footsteps. I felt it before I fully processed it. That same instinct, that deep animal part of the brain that doesn't bother with logic. It just knows. Someone else was out there. Callum heard it too. I could tell by the way his breathing changed, barely, but enough. "You hear that?" I whispered before I could stop myself. He didn't answer straight away. Then, very quietly, he said, "Stay inside." It wasn't a suggestion. It was the first time his voice had sounded like that, flat, controlled, with none of the polite softness he'd used before. I didn't like it, not at all. "What is it?" I asked. Again, no answer. The footsteps out in the trees stopped. Everything went still, and then a faint beam of light flickered between the branches, weak, unsteady, like a torch on its last bit of battery. It moved slowly at first, sweeping low across the ground, then lifting slightly, catching the edges of the trunks, the reeds, the uneven slope by the water. It wasn't pointed at the tent. Not yet. It felt like it was searching. I shifted closer to the entrance without thinking, trying to get a better angle through the fabric. There was a small gap where the zip didn't fully meet, just enough to see a sliver of the outside. "What's going on?" I whispered again. Callum was still there. I could sense him just beyond the flap, but he hadn't moved to leave or to hide. "I don't know," he said, but the way he said it, he was lying. The light in the trees paused, then tilted upward, and for just a second it caught a face. Not clearly, not enough for details, but enough. Someone standing between the trees, watching, not moving toward us, not calling out, just there. I felt my stomach drop so sharply it almost made me dizzy. "That's not," I started, but the words got stuck, because it wasn't right. That person didn't look lost. They didn't look confused or scared. They looked like they were waiting for something or someone. The light dipped again, lowering toward the ground. Then it flickered once, twice, and went out completely. Darkness swallowed the space where they'd been. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until it came out in a sharp rush. "Did you see that?" I whispered. No response. I frowned slightly and leaned closer to the entrance. "Callum?" Still nothing. A cold wave of panic started creeping in, slow at first, then all at once. I reached forward and pulled the zip down just a few inches, just enough to look out. There was no one there, not by the tent, not on the grass, not on the path leading back to the track. Callum was gone, completely, like he'd never been standing there at all. My chest tightened. "That's not funny," I said, louder now, the edge creeping into my voice. "Callum?" Nothing answered me, just the same silence, but now it felt different, heavier, closer. I pushed the zip down a little more and leaned out, sweeping the torch quickly across the clearing. Empty. The beam hit the old fire ring, the reeds, the edge of the track. No sign of him, no sign of anyone. I swallowed hard and pulled myself fully out of the tent, the cold air hitting me immediately. The ground felt uneven under my boots as I stepped forward, turning slowly, the light cutting through the dark in sharp, jittery movements. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing faintly across the water. No reply. I moved a few steps toward the shoreline, my eyes flicking constantly between the trees and the open space. Every shadow felt like it could shift if I looked at it long enough. "Callum, if you're messing about, it's not funny," I said, trying to sound annoyed, trying to force the situation back into something normal. Still nothing. Then a sound behind me, close, too close. I spun around so fast the torch beam shook wildly across the grass and caught something just at the edge of the light. Movement. A figure, right by the trail. Tall. Still. Exactly where I'd seen it before. But this time, it wasn't alone. There was another shape beside it. I felt the blood drain from my face. Two of them, standing there, not moving, not speaking, just watching me. The torchlight flickered slightly as my hand trembled, the beam catching on their legs, then their torsos, but never quite reaching their faces clearly enough to make them real. I couldn't tell if one of them was Callum. I couldn't tell if either of them were. And that was worse, much worse. "Who's there?" I said, my voice barely holding together. Neither of them answered. They didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, like they'd been expecting me to step out, like they'd been waiting for it. I took a slow step back, then another. Every instinct in my body was screaming now. Get back inside, get away, you shouldn't be out here. The second I shifted my weight again, one of them moved, not forward, not toward me, just slightly to the side. But it was enough to break whatever thin thread of control I still had. I turned and bolted back toward the tent, heart hammering so hard it blurred everything else out. I dove inside, yanked the zip shut with shaking hands, and pressed myself back against the inner wall. clutching the torch like it was the only thing anchoring me there. Outside, nothing. No footsteps rushing after me. No voices, no movement, just silence. But now I knew. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overreacting. And I definitely wasn't alone. Because whatever was out there wasn't just one of them. And they weren't wandering. They were watching, waiting. And I had just done exactly what they wanted. I didn't sleep. Not even close. I stayed exactly where I dropped myself inside the tent, back pressed against the inner wall, torch gripped so tightly my hands started to cramp after a while. I kept it off most of the time, only flicking it on in short bursts when my imagination started getting ahead of me. Every time the light cut through the darkness, it showed the same thing. Empty fabric, still air, nothing moving. But that didn't help, because it wasn't what I could see that was the problem anymore. It was everything I couldn't. At some point, I pulled my phone back out and checked the time. 2:17 a.m. It felt like it should have been closer to morning, like hours had passed. I remember staring at the screen thinking, there's no way it's only been that long. I considered calling someone, even though I knew there was no signal. Just the act of trying felt like it might ground me a bit. But when I held the phone up, I realized something strange. The battery had dropped, not a huge amount, but enough that it didn't make sense. I'd barely used it since arriving. Airplane mode was still on, no apps open. It should have been almost exactly where I'd left it. Instead, it was down by nearly 15%. I told myself it was nothing. Cold drains batteries, everyone knows that. Still didn't explain why it bothered me so much. I put it away and tried to focus on something else, anything else. But my mind kept circling back to the same things. The mud, the figure by the water, Callum standing outside the tent, then disappearing without a sound, the second person in the trees, the way they hadn't moved toward me. That part stuck. They hadn't chased me, hadn't called out, hadn't tried to stop me getting back inside. It didn't feel like I'd escaped anything. It felt like I'd been allowed to go. That thought sat with me for a long time. Long enough that it started to twist everything else around it. Because once that idea took hold, every little detail from earlier began to shift. Callum showing up just after I'd settled in, him asking if I was on my own, mentioning how quiet it gets, saying he didn't want me to think I was completely by myself. At the time, it had all felt slightly off but harmless enough. Now it felt like something else entirely, like he hadn't been making conversation, he'd been checking. I swallowed hard and shifted slightly, trying to ease the tension in my shoulders. The sleeping bag rustled softly, the sound seeming far too loud in the silence. I froze again, listening. Nothing. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied, like something was just beyond it, waiting. I don't know how long I sat like that, running through everything again and again, trying to make sense of it in a way that didn't end badly for me. At some point I must have drifted slightly, not asleep exactly, but that strange halfway state where your thoughts start slipping out of order. That's when I heard it, a whistle. Soft, low, not close to the tent this time. Farther out, somewhere near the trees. I went completely still. It wasn't a natural sound, not wind, not an animal. It had that deliberate shape to it, 2 short notes followed by a pause, then silence. My chest tightened again. A few seconds later, another whistle, from a different direction. I felt my stomach drop. They weren't just out there, they were moving, communicating. The realization hit me slowly, but when it did, it settled in deep. There wasn't just 1 or 2 of them. There were more. I pulled the sleeping bag tighter around me without thinking, like it would somehow make a difference. My eyes were fixed on the tent wall, tracking every faint shift in the fabric, every movement of shadow that could have been nothing or could have been something just outside. Then, footsteps. Slow again, circling, not rushing, not clumsy, measured, like before. They passed along one side of the tent, paused, then continued around the back. I held my breath, counting the seconds between each step, trying to figure out how many there were. At least 2, maybe 3. I couldn't be sure. I wanted to shout, to tell them to leave, to make it clear I knew they were there. But something stopped me. Some instinct that understood I didn't want their attention in that way. Not directly. Because as long as they were just circling, observing, there was still distance, still a barrier. The moment that changed, I didn't know what would happen, so I stayed quiet. The footsteps stopped again near the entrance. This time there was no voice, no polite question, just presence. Heavy, close. I could feel it through the thin layer of fabric. And then the zip moved. Just slightly, not enough to open, just enough to shift. I think my heart actually skipped. I lunged forward without thinking and grabbed the zip from inside, holding it tight with both hands like someone might try to pull it open at any second. Nothing happened. The movement stopped. The pressure on the other side lifted. Then, slowly, the footsteps moved away again. I stayed there, frozen in place, hands locked around the zip, not daring to let go. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. I lost track. Eventually, the sounds faded. The whistles didn't come back. The forest went still again, but it wasn't the same stillness as before. Now it felt like something had been confirmed, something I couldn't take back, because up until that moment, there had still been a small part of me trying to rationalize it, trying to turn it into something explainable. Now there was nothing left to explain. Whoever or whatever was out there, they knew exactly where I was. They knew I was alone, and they had come right up to the edge of the only thing between me and them, just to show me they could. I didn't move from that spot until the first faint hint of gray started bleeding into the fabric of the tent. Dawn, or at least something close to it. The moment I realized the night was finally lifting, something in me shifted with it. Not relief, exactly. More like a decision forming. I wasn't staying. Not another hour. Not another minute longer than I had to. I waited until the light was strong enough that I could see the outline of the clearing through the tent. Then slowly, carefully, I let go of the zip. My hands ached from how tightly I'd been holding it. For a second, I just sat there, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. No movement. Just the faint sound of wind brushing through the reeds by the water. Normal. Or at least, close enough to normal. I took a breath, steadying myself. Then reached forward and unzipped the tent. The zip sounded far too loud. That dry, dragging noise cut through the quiet like it didn't belong there, and I found myself wincing as I pulled it open, half expecting something to react to it. But nothing did. The clearing outside looked still, pale, washed in that early gray light that flattens everything out and makes it hard to judge distance. For a second, I didn't move. I just sat there, staring through the opening, waiting for something to shift. Nothing did. So I pushed myself forward and stepped out. The cold hit me straight away, sharper than the night before, like the air had teeth now. My breath came out in quick bursts as I turned slowly on the spot, scanning the grass, the track, the edge of the trees. Empty. Completely empty. If I hadn't lived through the night, I think I might have convinced myself it had all been in my head. There was nothing out of place. No footprints I could clearly make out in the damp ground. No signs of movement. No broken branches, no disturbed patches of grass. Just the same clearing I'd set up in the evening before. Calm, quiet, almost peaceful. It made my skin crawl. I didn't waste time. That decision I'd made in the dark, that I was leaving, came back sharp and certain now. I ducked back into the tent and started packing as quickly as I could manage. Not neatly, not properly. Just stuffing things into my bag in the order I grabbed them. Sleeping bag, half rolled and shoved in. Clothes damp and tangled. Torch, batteries, food, whatever I could find within reach. My hands kept slipping. I dropped things twice. Swore under my breath, louder than I meant to. Every few seconds I'd stop and listen, convinced I'd heard something just beyond the tent. But each time, nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not from one place, from several. Like there were eyes just out of sight, following every movement, waiting to see what I'd do next. I forced myself to ignore it and kept packing. It only took a few minutes before I had everything, or at least everything I thought I did. I zipped the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and stepped back out into the clearing, already turning toward the track. That's when I noticed it, my car, or rather, the space where it should have been. I stopped dead. For a second, my brain didn't process it properly. It just didn't line up. The angle, the distance, the shape of the ground, it all looked wrong. Then it hit me. The car was gone. Every bit of air left my lungs in one sharp breath. No, 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 I muttered, taking a few quick steps forward, like getting closer would somehow fix it. But it didn't. The patch of ground where I'd parked was empty. No tire tracks, no disturbed mud, nothing. It looked exactly like the rest of the clearing, untouched. My stomach dropped so hard it made me feel sick. "That's not possible," I said out loud, my voice thin and shaking. "That's not. How?" I turned in a slow circle, scanning the track, the trees, the edges of the clearing, like the car might suddenly appear if I looked at the right angle. It didn't. It was just gone. Panic hit me properly then. Not the slow, creeping kind from the night before. This was sharp, immediate, overwhelming. I stumbled forward to where it had been, crouching down and pressing my hand into the mud like I was checking for something I couldn't see. It was cold, smooth, no deep grooves, no marks, nothing. That didn't make sense. Even if someone had taken it, somehow there should have been something left behind. Tracks, drag marks, anything. But there was nothing, like it had never been there at all. I stood back up too quickly and nearly lost my balance. Think. I forced myself to breathe. In, out, slow it down. The keys. That thought came out of nowhere, but it hit hard enough to focus me. My keys. I dropped the bag off my shoulder and unzipped the small pocket at the top, hands fumbling as I searched through it. Nothing. I checked again, more carefully this time. Still nothing. My chest tightened. No, I put them. I stopped because I knew exactly where I'd put them. In the mesh pocket inside the tent, by my head. I checked them last night. I turned slowly and looked back at the tent. For a second, I didn't move. I didn't want to, because something about that realization, about the fact that the keys weren't where I'd left them, felt worse than the car being gone. Much worse. Still, I walked back. Each step felt heavier than it should have. The tent flap was still open from when I packed in a rush. I crouched down and reached inside, pulling the inner pocket open, empty. I stared at it for a few seconds like my eyes might be wrong. They weren't. The keys were gone. My heart started hammering again. That meant someone had been inside. Not just outside, not just circling, inside. While I was in there, the thought hit me so hard I had to sit back on my heels, one hand pressing against the ground to steady myself. No, that didn't make sense. I would have heard something, felt something. There was no way someone could have opened the tent, reached in, taken the keys, and left again without me noticing. Unless it hadn't happened when I was awake. A cold wave moved through me. At some point, during that long stretch of fear and half-sleep, someone had come close enough to reach inside, close enough to take what they wanted. And I hadn't even known. I pushed myself up quickly, suddenly desperate to get out of that clearing. The air felt wrong now, thicker, like it was closing in. I grabbed my bag again and turned toward the track, my mind racing, trying to piece together what this meant. No car, no keys, no way to just leave. I'd have to walk. Back up the track, through the trees, out to the road. It couldn't be that far. I'd driven it, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour on foot, maybe more. I could do that. I had to. I took a step forward and then stopped. Something caught my eye near the edge of the grass, by the water. That same flat stone. My stomach twisted. Slowly, carefully, I walked over, and there, sitting exactly where the mug had been, were my keys, placed neatly in the center of the stone, clean, dry, like they'd been set there on purpose. I stared at them, my mind struggling to catch up. They'd taken them from inside my tent and brought them out here, just to leave them, out in the open, where I'd find them. A horrible, creeping understanding began to form. This wasn't random. None of it was. Every step, every movement, every moment from the night before, it had all been controlled, planned. They knew where I was. They knew what I had. They knew exactly how far they could go. And now, they were letting me leave. I picked the keys up slowly, my fingers trembling as I closed them around the cold metal. For a second, I just stood there, staring out across the water. The far bank was empty again, still, silent, like it had been when I arrived. But it didn't feel the same anymore, not even close, because now I understood something I hadn't before. I hadn't stumbled into that place by accident, and I hadn't been alone there, not for a single second. I turned and walked back toward the track without looking back again, not because I wasn't curious, but because I knew if I looked long enough, I might see them, standing there, watching, waiting, and I didn't think I could handle that. Not anymore. I didn't get back in the car straight away. That's the part that still bothers me when I think about it now, how I hesitated. I had the keys in my hand. I could see the car exactly where I'd left it the day before, sitting at the edge of the clearing like nothing had happened. Same angle, same mud splashed up the sides, even the faint streak on the rear window where I'd wiped it with my sleeve, like it had never been gone. I stood there a few feet away from it, just staring, because it didn't feel right. It should have been relief, pure, simple relief. Car's back, keys are back, get in and leave, end of story. But it wasn't. It felt staged, like someone had reset everything just enough to make it look normal again. My hand tightened around the keys. Just get in the car, I told myself. You're overthinking it. You've got what you need. Just go. I stepped forward, reached out, and pulled the door open. The inside looked untouched. My coat still on the passenger seat. The empty coffee cup in the holder. Even the radio display was exactly as I'd left it. I leaned in slightly, scanning the footwell, the back seat, the space behind the driver's seat. Nothing. No sign anyone had been in there. Still, I didn't get in. I straightened up slowly and looked back toward the trees. The same thought kept pushing its way forward, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. They didn't take the car. They moved it. Or at least, that's what it felt like. Because if they'd taken it properly, why bring it back? Why go to the effort? Why not just leave me stranded? Unless this wasn't about stopping me from leaving. It was about controlling how I left. That thought settled in quietly, but once it was there, it didn't shift. I shut the car door again, took a step back. My heart was already picking up speed again, but this time it wasn't pure panic. It was something else. Something sharper, more focused, because suddenly, leaving didn't feel like the only option. Not yet. I looked back toward the trees again, toward the far side of the mirror where I'd seen the figure, where I'd seen them. And for the first time since arriving, a different question pushed through the fear. What actually happened here? Not the surface level version, not the bits I could brush off as nerves or imagination, the real version. Because whatever had been out there last night, it hadn't just wandered through. It had watched, moved, acted with purpose. And now it had put everything back exactly how it wanted it. That wasn't random. That meant there was something here, something hidden. I don't know if it was curiosity or stubbornness or just the fact that fear had nowhere else to go. But instead of getting in the car, I turned, back toward the water, back toward the trees. I told myself I wouldn't go far. Just a quick look, just enough to see if there was anything obvious, another campsite, a path, anything that explained what I'd seen. Then I'd leave. That was the plan. At least that's what I told myself. The ground felt different walking back across it in daylight, softer, more uneven than I remembered, like I was noticing things I'd missed before. The slope near the reeds dipped slightly more than it looked from a distance, and there were patches of earth where the grass didn't grow properly, leaving dark, damp soil exposed underneath. I kept glancing over my shoulder as I moved. The car was still there, still exactly where it should be. I turned back and kept going. The edge of the trees came up faster than I expected. In the dark, it had felt like a wall. In daylight, it looked thinner, more open, but once I stepped into it, that changed immediately. The light dropped off. Not completely, but enough that the space around me felt tighter. The trees were closer together than they looked from the outside, their branches overlapping, cutting off the sky in jagged pieces. I slowed my pace. The ground here was covered in a thick layer of damp needles and leaves, muffling my steps almost completely. It made everything feel quieter again. Too quiet. I moved a few more steps in, then stopped, listened. Nothing. No wind through the branches, no birds, no distant sounds from the road. Just that same, held silence. I turned slowly, trying to get my bearings. From this angle, I could still see the edge of the clearing through the trees. The car was just visible between two trunks, a dull shape against the pale grass. That was good. I wasn't too far in. I could turn back whenever I wanted. I took another step forward, and that's when I saw it. A strip of tape, thin, reflective, tied around one of the lower branches at about chest height. I frowned slightly and moved closer. It wasn't old, not weathered or faded like you'd expect if it had been there for a long time. It looked recent, clean, bright enough that it caught the light even in the shade. I reached out and touched it. It was tied tight, not loose or accidental, deliberate. I glanced around, scanning the nearby trees. Another strip, a few feet ahead, then another. They formed a line, not perfectly straight, but close enough, like markers, like something meant to be followed. A slow, uneasy feeling settled in my chest. This wasn't a natural trail. It wasn't worn down from people passing through. It had been marked, set out. I took a step back, then hesitated, because if someone had gone to the trouble of marking a path like this, it had to lead somewhere. And I already had a feeling I knew where. My eyes drifted further into the trees, following the faint line of tape as it disappeared deeper into the forest. Everything in me was telling me to leave, to turn around, get in the car, and not think about any of this again. But another part of me, quieter but just as persistent, kept pushing back. If you leave now, you'll never know. That thought stuck harder than it should have, because it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something else, something heavier. If there were people out here doing whatever they'd been doing last night, then walking away meant leaving it behind, pretending it didn't exist, pretending I hadn't seen any of it. And I couldn't quite do that. Not yet. I swallowed hard, adjusted the strap on my bag, and looked back one last time toward the clearing. The car was still there, still waiting, still an easy way out. Then I turned back toward the tape and followed it. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. The ground dipped and rose unevenly, forcing me to watch my footing. Branches caught at my jacket. The light shifted constantly as the trees thickened, turning everything a dull, muted gray-green. After a few minutes, the clearing was completely out of sight. I slowed again, listening, watching. Every step felt heavier now, more deliberate, like I was crossing a line I shouldn't. Then, something changed. Not a sound, not movement, just the air. It felt different, colder, stiller. I couldn't explain it properly, but it was like stepping into a space that had been sealed off from everything else. My skin prickled. I stopped walking. Ahead of me, through the trees, something darker broke the pattern of trunks and branches. A shape, low, angular, not natural. My heart started pounding again. Slowly, carefully, I moved forward. One step, then another. The shape became clearer, metal, rusting, half hidden beneath ivy and branches. A structure. Exactly where it shouldn't be. My stomach dropped, because I knew before I even got close enough to see it properly. This was it. This was where the path led. And whatever had been watching me last night had wanted me to find it. I took one more step forward, and that's when I heard it. A sound from inside. Soft, metal shifting, like something moving behind a door that shouldn't have been there at all. I stopped dead. The sound hadn't been loud. If anything, it was too quiet. Just a faint scrape of metal against metal, like something inside had shifted its weight slightly. But out there, in that stillness, it might as well have been a shout. I didn't move, didn't breathe properly. Just stood there, staring at the shape ahead of me as my brain tried to catch up with what my eyes were already telling me. It wasn't just debris. It wasn't some collapsed bit of fencing or an old shed left to rot. It was a building, or what was left of one. The closer I looked, the clearer it became. Brickwork buried under moss and ivy, sections of corrugated metal bent inward like something had caved in over time. The roof sagged in places, half collapsed, leaving jagged gaps where the gray morning light filtered through. It sat low against the slope, almost sunken into the earth, like it had been built there and then forgotten. Except it hadn't been forgotten. Not properly, because the path, the strips of tape, led straight to it. And that sound, that hadn't come from an empty place. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry again. Leave. The thought came back, louder now, stronger. Turn around, walk back, get in the car, go. But my feet didn't move. I took a slow step forward instead, then another. Each one felt heavier than the last. As I got closer, more details came into view. The ivy wasn't just growing wild. It had been pulled back in places, like someone had cleared just enough space to access the entrance. The ground around it wasn't untouched either. The layer of leaves and needles had been disturbed, flattened in irregular patches. Foot traffic. Recent. My heart thudded harder. This place wasn't abandoned. Not really. I moved to the side slightly, angling myself so I could see the front more clearly. There was a doorway, or what had once been one. The frame was still intact, but the door itself, metal, rusted through in spots, hung slightly open, just enough to leave a narrow gap into the darkness beyond. And inside, that's where the sound had come from. I felt something twist in my chest, because I knew, standing there, that I was right on the edge of something I didn't understand. and I had a choice. I could walk away or I could look. I don't know why I chose the second one. Maybe because after everything from the night before, leaving without knowing felt worse than whatever might be inside. Maybe because part of me still needed to believe there was a normal explanation waiting on the other side of that door. Something I could point to and say, that's what it was. That's all it was. So I stepped closer, carefully, quietly. The ground shifted slightly under my boots, damp and uneven. I paused at the edge of the doorway, just outside the reach of the shadow it cast, and listened. Nothing. No movement. No voices. Just the same silence as before. I leaned slightly to the side and peered through the gap. At first, I couldn't see much. The inside was darker than I expected, the light from outside barely reaching more than a few feet in. But as my eyes adjusted, shapes started to form. A narrow space, concrete floor, walls lined with old piping and rusted fittings. It looked like some kind of utility building, old, disused. Except there was something wrong with that impression. Because the floor, it wasn't covered in dust or debris. It was clear. Recently, I felt my stomach tighten. Then I saw it. A light, faint yellow, deeper inside. Not strong enough to fill the space, but enough to flicker against the walls in uneven pulses. My breath caught. Someone was in there. I didn't realize I'd taken a step forward until my shoulder brushed lightly against the edge of the doorway, the metal cold even through my jacket. I froze again, listened. Still nothing. But the light, it was real. And it was moving, not wildly, just slightly, like it was being carried or set down. I should have left then. I know that. Everything in me knows that now. But at the time, I just needed to be sure. I shifted again, leaning a bit further into the doorway, while just enough to widen my view. The space opened up slightly beyond the first wall. There was another room, or a continuation of the same one. And in that space, I saw it. A lantern, old-fashioned, metal frame, glass sides, set on the floor. The flame inside flickered weakly, casting long, uneven shadows across the walls. But it wasn't the lantern that made my chest tighten. It was what was around it. Objects. Scattered at first glance. But no, not scattered. Placed, carefully, a rucksack, a pair of boots, a folded jacket, a plastic water bottle. All of it arranged in a loose circle around the lantern, like someone had set it out deliberately, like it meant something. My eyes moved slowly over the items, taking them in, trying to make sense of them. And then I noticed something that made the back of my neck prickle. None of it matched. Different styles, different sizes, different levels of wear. These weren't one person's things. They belonged to different people. The realization hit quietly, but it hit hard. This wasn't a campsite. This wasn't storage. I didn't get to finish the thought, because behind me, the forest shifted. A sound, close, too close. Footsteps, not careful this time, not slow, deliberate, coming straight toward the structure, my entire body locked up. For a split second, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Then instinct kicked in, hard. I stepped back from the doorway, turning just enough to look toward the trees, and saw movement between them. More than one, closing in, fast. My heart slammed into overdrive. They're here. Not just watching, not just circling, coming for me. I didn't think. I ran, straight past the side of the structure, back toward the path I'd followed in. Branches caught at my arms as I pushed through, the tape markers flashing past in quick, disjointed glimpses. My breath came out in sharp bursts, too fast, too loud, but I couldn't slow it down. Behind me, footsteps, more than one, crashing through the undergrowth now. No attempt to stay quiet, no need to. They knew exactly where I was. I veered slightly off the marked path without meaning to, my footing slipping on the uneven ground. For a second, I nearly went down, my boot catching on a root, but I caught myself just in time and kept going. Faster. Adrenaline burned through me, drowning everything else out. The trees blurred together. The light shifted erratically between branches. I had no idea where I was heading anymore. Only one thing mattered, getting away. I risked a glance back, just for a second, and immediately wished I hadn't. I couldn't see them clearly, but I saw enough. Shapes moving between the trees, keeping pace, not gaining, but not falling behind either. Like they knew exactly how fast they needed to go. Panic surged harder. I pushed myself faster, lungs burning now, legs starting to ache but refusing to slow. I didn't know how long I ran. Minutes, maybe longer. Time didn't make sense anymore. Eventually, the ground started to slope downward more sharply. the trees thinning just enough that I realized I'd gone off course completely. The markers were gone, the clearing gone, the structure somewhere behind me, and I had no idea how to get back. I slowed just slightly, my chest heaving, and listened. The footsteps behind me, gone. Silence again, but this time it didn't feel like safety. It felt like something worse, like they'd stopped because they didn't need to follow anymore, because they already knew where I was. I turned slowly, scanning the trees around me. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound, but I knew. Deep down, in that same place that had warned me the night before, this wasn't over, not even close, because I hadn't escaped them. I'd just run deeper into whatever this place really was, and now I was completely alone in it. I didn't move for a while, not properly. I just stood there, bent slightly forward with my hands on my knees, trying to get my breathing under control while staring at nothing in particular. My ears were straining for any sound, footsteps, voices, even that whistle from the night before, but there was nothing. Just my own breath. Too loud, too fast. The silence that followed felt different from before. Not calm, not even tense, empty, like I'd run far enough that whatever had been following me didn't need to anymore. That thought made my stomach turn, because it didn't feel like I'd escaped. It felt like I'd been redirected. I straightened slowly and turned in a slow circle, trying to get my bearings. The trees here were thicker, darker somehow, packed closer together so the light barely reached the ground. Everything looked the same, trunks, branches, patches of moss, the same dull green and brown repeating in every direction. No tape, no path, no sign of the clearing. Nothing. I took a few tentative steps forward, then stopped again almost immediately. Which way had I come from? I tried to picture it, the slope, the direction of the light, the angle I'd turned when I ran, but it was all blurred together now. Panic had wiped it clean. Think, I muttered under my breath, more to keep myself focused than anything else. Just think. But thinking didn't help, because the more I tried to reconstruct it, the more uncertain everything became. I picked a direction anyway. I had to. Standing still wasn't an option, so I started walking, slow at first, careful, watching where I put my feet, scanning ahead for anything that looked familiar, any break in the trees, any sign of that reflective tape. Nothing. Just more forest. After a few minutes, I sped up, then slowed again, then stopped. Every sound I made seemed too loud. Every snapped twig, every shift of leaves underfoot made me flinch slightly, glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see something closing in behind me. But there was never anything there. That was the worst part. If I'd heard them again, footsteps, voices, anything, it would have meant I knew where they were. But this was just not knowing. I kept walking. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time didn't feel stable anymore. My legs started to ache properly now, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving behind that heavy, dragging exhaustion. My throat was dry. I realized I hadn't had any water since the night before. I stopped again and listened. Still nothing. No birds, no wind, no distant road noise, nothing that tied this place to the outside world. It felt cut off, completely. That's when the doubt started creeping in. Slow at first, then stronger. What if I'm not going the right way? What if I'm going further in? I turned slightly, looking back over my shoulder. The direction I'd come from looked exactly like the one ahead. No difference, no markers, no way to tell. I swallowed hard. All right, I said quietly, forcing myself to stay steady. Just keep going. You'll hit something. I didn't believe it, but it was better than standing there. So I kept moving. A few more minutes passed before something changed. Not a sound, not movement, just a shape, something unnatural again. Low to the ground, partially hidden beneath leaves and dirt. I slowed as I approached, my chest tightening slightly. It looked like a bag, a rucksack, dark blue, half covered in damp leaves. I stopped a few feet away from it. For a second, I didn't move. Didn't want to, because I already knew. I didn't need to get closer to understand what it meant. Still, I did. I stepped forward slowly and crouched down, brushing some of the leaves aside. It wasn't old, not really. The fabric was worn, sure, but not rotting. The zips weren't rusted. One of the straps had been repaired with black tape recently. Someone had used this. Not long ago. I reached out and nudged it slightly. It shifted easily, too easily, like it had been placed there. Not dropped, not lost. Left. My stomach twisted again. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that, but I did. The zip came away with a soft rasp, and I peeled it back just enough to look inside. Clothes folded neatly, a rolled-up jumper, a spare pair of socks, a water bottle, half full. My throat tightened. This wasn't abandoned, not in the way things usually are. This was interrupted, like someone had been in the middle of something and just stopped. I pushed the zip closed again quickly and stood up, wiping my hands against my jeans without thinking. Just keep going, I muttered. But now it was different. Now I knew. This wasn't just something that had happened to me. There were others, or had been. I took a few steps away from the bag, then stopped again. Something caught my eye, another shape, further ahead, smaller this time. I moved toward it slowly, every step heavier than the last. It was a shoe, just one, mud-stained, lying on its side. I didn't get too close this time. Didn't need to. I could see enough, the ground around it, disturbed. Not like normal movement, not like someone just walking past. More like a struggle. I stepped back instinctively, my heart picking up again. No, I whispered. The forest around me felt tighter now. Closer, like it had shifted while I wasn't looking. I turned, scanning the trees again. Still nothing, but the silence, it had changed. There was something underneath it now, something I couldn't quite hear, but could feel. And then a whistle, soft, distant. My head snapped toward the sound. It came from somewhere ahead, not close, but not far enough. A second later, another whistle, behind me. My chest tightened instantly. No, 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 I turned again. Another direction, another whistle. 3 points, at least. They weren't random. They were mapping my position. The realization hit all at once. They hadn't lost me. They'd never lost me. They'd let me run, let me tire myself out, let me get disoriented, and now they were closing in. My breathing quickened, panic rising sharp and fast again. I took a step back, then another, trying to decide which direction was safest, which one led away. But there was no way to know. Every direction looked the same. Every direction felt wrong. The whistles came again, closer this time. Not rushed, not frantic, controlled, measured, like they knew exactly how long it would take to reach me. I spun in a slow circle, my chest tightening, my vision starting to narrow slightly. Move? I had to move. Standing still was the worst thing I could do. I picked a direction, any direction, and started running again. Branches tore at my jacket as I pushed through, my footing slipping on damp leaves and uneven ground. I didn't care anymore, didn't care about staying quiet, didn't care about where I was going, just away. Away from the sound, away from them. But as I ran, the whistles followed, not chasing, not rushing, just keeping pace, like they didn't need to hurry, like they already knew I wasn't getting out of this forest. Not easily, not anymore. I don't remember deciding to change direction. 1 second I was running blindly through the trees, lungs burning, legs barely keeping up with the pace I'd forced on them. And the next, something shifted. The ground. It leveled out, subtly at first, then more noticeably. The thick layer of leaves thinned, giving way to harder soil, packed down in a way that didn't happen naturally out there. My footing steadied slightly, and without thinking, I slowed just enough to notice it. A path, not marked, not obvious, but used. My heart kicked harder in my chest. This is it. It had to be. I pushed forward, following the faint line as it cut between the trees. The branches seemed to thin slightly here, the space opening up just enough that the light changed, brighter, less enclosed. I risked a glance behind me. Nothing. No movement, no figures, no sign of anyone following. But the whistles, they'd stopped. That didn't feel like relief. It felt worse. Like they didn't need them anymore. I turned back and kept moving, faster now, hope pushing through the fear in sharp bursts. The path widened slightly. The trees began to thin further. And then I saw it. Light. Real light. Not the dull gray filtered through branches, but open sky beyond the tree line. My chest tightened with something close to relief. I stumbled forward, breaking into a run again, pushing through the last stretch of undergrowth, and burst out onto the track. The same one I'd driven in on. For a second, I just stood there, breathing hard, staring at it like I didn't quite believe it was real. Gravel, mud, tire marks, normal, solid, a way out. I almost laughed. Actually felt it rise in my chest, this shaky, disbelieving sound, because it didn't feel possible. After everything, after getting turned around like that, after I'd made it back. I turned quickly, scanning the tree line behind me. Still nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the same dense wall of forest, quiet and still as ever. But now I knew better. They were there, somewhere, watching. They had to be. The thought snapped me back into motion. I didn't waste another second. I started walking fast, almost jogging, back down the track toward where I'd left the car. My legs ached with every step, but I pushed through it, my focus locked on one thing now. Get to the car. Get in. That's it. Nothing else mattered. The track stretched out ahead of me, longer than I remembered, the slight incline making each step just a bit harder than it should have been. I kept glancing over my shoulder as I moved, half expecting to see someone stepping out from the trees behind me. But there was nothing. No one followed. No whistles. No footsteps. Just my own breathing and the crunch of gravel under my boots. It felt wrong. Too easy. That thought crept in quietly, but it stayed. Because after everything that had happened, this didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a gap, a pause. I picked up the pace anyway. The clearing came into view sooner than I expected. The trees opened up, and I saw the pale stretch of grass, the edge of the mere just beyond it, and the car, still there, exactly where I'd left it. My chest loosened slightly. I crossed the clearing quickly, not slowing down, my eyes flicking constantly between the car and the tree line behind me. Nothing moved. Nothing followed. I reached the door, fumbled with the keys slightly before getting them in the lock, and pulled it open. The moment I was inside, I slammed it shut behind me and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking into place felt louder than it should have. Safer though, or at least safer than standing outside. I sat there for a second, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing hard, trying to steady myself. "You're fine," I muttered under my breath. "You're fine, just go." I turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed once, then started. Relief hit fast, sharp, real. I didn't hesitate. I put the car into gear and pulled away, tires slipping slightly in the mud before catching properly as I guided it back onto the track. The moment I was moving, something shifted in my chest. Not calm, not yet, but close. Closer than I'd been all morning. I kept my eyes forward, focused on the track, on getting out of there as quickly as possible. The trees pressed in on either side again as I drove, the branches scraping faintly along the car in places, but I didn't care. Just keep going. Just don't stop. The bend in the track came up ahead, the one near where I'd almost missed the turning the day before. Once I got past that, I'd be on the main road. Proper road. People. Signal. Everything normal again. I leaned forward slightly, gripping the wheel tighter as I approached it. And then, something moved. Just at the edge of the track. My heart slammed in my chest. I hit the brakes instinctively, the car jolting slightly as it slowed. There, standing just off the side of the road, partially hidden between the trees, a figure. Still, I stared at it, my breath catching. For a second I couldn't move, couldn't think. It didn't step forward, didn't come onto the track. Just stood there, watching. Exactly like before. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the wheel. Just go, I whispered to myself. I pressed down on the accelerator again. The car moved forward slowly at first, then picked up speed as I passed the spot where the figure stood. I didn't look directly at it as I went by. I couldn't, but I saw enough in the corner of my eye. There wasn't just one. There were two. Standing side by side, perfectly still, facing the track, facing me. My stomach twisted. I kept driving, didn't slow, didn't stop, didn't look back. The bend came up fast. I took it a bit too quickly, the tires slipping slightly again before catching, the car swaying just enough to make my pulse spike harder. Then the trees thinned, the track widened, and just ahead, the main road, clear, empty, open. Relief hit so hard it almost made me dizzy. I pulled out onto it without stopping, the tires hitting tarmac with a solid, reassuring sound that grounded me instantly. Real. This was real. I pressed the accelerator harder, the car picking up speed as I put distance between myself and the track, the forest, everything behind me. Only then, only when I was well clear, did I glance in the rearview mirror. The track was still visible in the distance. Empty. No movement. No figures. Nothing. For a second, I let myself believe it was over, that I'd made it out, that whatever had happened back there was done. But as I turned my eyes back to the road ahead, something caught my attention. The dashboard. A small flicker of movement. I frowned slightly, glancing down, and that's when I saw it, resting on the passenger seat, something that hadn't been there before. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head and looked at it. A phone. Not mine. Black. Screen cracked, still on. The display flickered faintly as the car moved, and on the screen, a single image, grainy, taken from a distance, of the clearing of my tent. From the night before, my hands tightened on the wheel, my chest constricted, because I recognized the angle, the position. That photo hadn't been taken from the trees. It had been taken from somewhere else, somewhere closer, much closer. And in the corner of the image, barely visible, was a figure standing right behind me. I hadn't seen them. Not once. Not the entire time I was there. A cold, sinking feeling settled in my chest, because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. I hadn't just been watched, I'd been followed, studied. And at some point, while I thought I was alone, they had been close enough to stand right behind me, and I never even knew. I didn't stop driving until I reached the first proper village. I don't even remember the name of it. Just a row of stone houses, a small shop on the corner, and a pub with a faded sign swinging in the wind. It felt unreal pulling into a place like that after everything that had just happened, like I'd stepped out of one world and into another that had no idea what I'd just come from. I parked badly, half on the curb, engine still running for a few seconds before I realized and turned it off. My hands were still shaking, not as violently as before, but enough that I noticed it when I tried to unclip my seatbelt. The phone was still there, on the passenger seat. Screen dark now. For a moment, I just stared at it. Didn't touch it. Didn't want to. Because as long as I didn't pick it up, there was still a tiny part of me that could pretend it hadn't been there at all. That none of it had been. But I couldn't leave it. Not really. So I reached over slowly, picked it up, and held it at arm's length like it might do something if I got too close. The screen lit up faintly when I moved it, the cracked glass catching the light. The image was still there, the clearing, my tent, the angle, low, partially obscured, like it had been taken from behind something. And me, barely visible in the frame, standing near the water, completely unaware, my stomach twisted. I locked the screen and dropped the phone onto the seat again, suddenly not wanting it in my hands anymore. Right, I muttered, forcing myself to move. Police, just go to the police. The station wasn't hard to find. Small place, single-story building, brick with a faded sign out front and 2 cars parked beside it. It didn't look like somewhere that dealt with anything serious, if I'm honest. More like noise complaints, missing dogs, that sort of thing. Still, it was something. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The warmth hit me straight away, along with that faint smell of old carpet and paper. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. There was a desk at the front, a woman sitting behind it looking up as I came in. She was probably in her 40s, glasses low on her nose, expression neutral in that way people get when they're expecting something routine. Yes, she said. I realized then I didn't know how to start. All of it. The forest, the people, the structure, the phone, it didn't fit neatly into a sentence. I need to report something, I said eventually, my voice still not quite steady. She nodded, already reaching for a form. All right, what's happened? I hesitated, then just said it. I think someone tried to, I don't know, trap me, out near Blackthorn Mere. That got a reaction, not a big one, but enough. Her expression shifted slightly, just for a second, before settling back into something more controlled. Okay, she said. Let's take this one step at a time. You're safe now, yeah? Yeah, I said. I drove straight here. She nodded again, making a note of something, then gestured to a chair nearby. Take a seat. I'll get someone to speak with you. I sat. The chair felt too soft, too normal. Everything did. I kept expecting someone else to walk in behind me, to open the door, to step into the room like nothing had happened and just stand there. But no one did. A few minutes later, a man came through from the back. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, plain clothes, but with that same air about him that told you he worked there. Morning, he said, pulling out the chair opposite me. I'm D.I. Clark. You said you had something to report? I nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah. All right, he said, sitting down. Start from the beginning. So I did. I told him everything. From the drive-in, the clearing, the mug, the night, the footsteps, the whistles, the structure, the chase, getting lost, finding the track again, the figures by the road, the phone, all of it. I didn't leave anything out, didn't try to soften it or make it sound more reasonable. I just said it how it happened. By the time I finished, my throat was dry again, my hands clenched together tightly in my lap without me realizing. There was a silence when I stopped. Not long, but long enough. Clark leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me for a moment. Right, he said eventually. That's quite a lot. I know how it sounds, I said quickly. But I'm telling you, there were people out there, more than one. They were watching me, following me. There's something in those woods. That building, I saw it. Okay, he said, holding up a hand slightly. Let's just slow it down for a second. That tone, calm, measured. It made something in my chest tighten. I'm not making this up, I said. I didn't say you were, he replied. I'm just trying to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. I took a breath, nodded. Right. He glanced down at his notes briefly, then back at me. You said there was a structure? Some kind of building? Yeah. Old, metal, brick, looked like it had been there a long time, but it wasn't abandoned. There were things inside. Bags, clothes, different people's stuff. And you're certain about that? Yes. And the location? You could take us back to it? I hesitated, then nodded. I think so. There was a marked path, tape on the trees. He made another note. All right, and these people you saw, how many would you say there were? I don't know, I admitted. At least 2, maybe more. I heard whistles, different directions. He nodded again, slow. Then, and you mentioned a phone? I froze slightly. Yeah. Where is it now? I glanced back toward the door, toward the car outside. In the car. Can we take a look at it? Something about that question made my stomach tighten again. But I nodded. Yeah. We stepped outside together, the cold air hitting me again as I crossed back to the car. I opened the passenger door and reached in, picking the phone up carefully. Still there, still real. I handed it to him. He turned it over in his hand, then pressed the side button. The screen lit up. The image appeared. He looked at it for a few seconds. Then his expression shifted slightly. Not disbelief, not exactly, but something I couldn't quite place. You recognize this? I asked. He didn't answer straight away, just kept looking at the screen. Then, where did you say this was taken, he asked. The clearing, I said, where I was camping. He nodded slowly, then looked up at me. All right, he said, we'll log this. We'll get a team out there, have a proper look around, see what we can find. That's it, I said, the frustration slipping into my voice. This isn't normal, is it? You can't just... We're taking it seriously, he said, calm but firm. But we need to verify what's actually there first. I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped because I could see it in his face, that careful distance, that controlled tone. He didn't fully believe me, not really. Maybe parts of it, maybe enough to check it out, but not the whole thing, not what it actually was. And I realized, standing there in the cold, that I couldn't make him, couldn't force him to see it the way I had, because I'd been there, alone, in it. He hadn't. No one else had. Fine, I said eventually. He gave a small nod. We'll be in touch, he said. For now, I'd suggest you head home. Get some rest. Rest. The word felt almost ridiculous, but I nodded anyway. Yeah. I watched him walk back into the station, the phone still in his hand. Then I got back into the car, sat there, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process everything. For a second, just a second, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe I'd done what I needed to. Reported it, handed it over, let someone else deal with it. But that feeling didn't last, because as I started the engine and pulled away, one thought kept pushing through everything else. They knew where I'd been. They'd been close enough to touch my things, close enough to stand behind me, close enough to take that photo, and now I just told someone else about them. Given details, locations, a direction. If they were watching before, there was no reason to think they'd stopped, and if they hadn't, then this wasn't over. Not for me. Not yet. I didn't go straight home. I told myself I would just get back, lock the door, try to sleep, pretend it was over. That's what made sense. That's what anyone would have done. But I didn't. Instead, I stopped twice on the way back. First, at a petrol station, where I stood for longer than I needed to under those harsh white lights, pretending to decide between things I wasn't going to buy, just because being around people, even strangers, felt safer than being alone in the car with my thoughts. Then again, at a services further down, where I sat with a coffee that went cold in my hands while I replayed everything for the 100th time. It didn't feel finished. That was the problem. Nothing about it felt like something that had ended. It felt like something I'd stepped out of, briefly, and that thought followed me all the way home. By the time I got back, it was late afternoon. The street looked exactly as it always did. Same parked cars, same cracked pavement, same quiet row of terraced houses, all lined up like nothing ever changed. I sat in the car for a minute before getting out, just watching, waiting. I don't know what I expected. Someone standing across the road, a figure at the end of the street, anything, but there was nothing. So I grabbed my bag, locked the car, and went inside. The moment the door shut behind me, the silence hit again, different from the forest, but still, too quiet. I locked the door immediately, then checked it again. The flat felt smaller than usual, more enclosed. I dropped my bag by the sofa, kicked off my boots, and stood there for a second, just listening. The faint hum of the fridge, pipes ticking somewhere in the walls, distant traffic, normal sounds, safe sounds. I let out a slow breath. "You're fine," I muttered again. Same words as before, same lack of conviction behind them. I didn't unpack, didn't shower, didn't do anything I planned to. Instead, I sat down, pulled my laptop onto my knees, and opened it. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed answers. Maybe because sitting there doing nothing felt worse. So I started searching. Blackthorn Mere, nothing useful. A couple of vague mentions on hiking forums, one or two photos, no real detail, no warnings, no stories. I frowned and refined the search, added words. Disappearance, missing, incident. That's when things started to change. Not dramatically, not at first, just small things. Old posts, buried threads, comments that didn't quite line up. I found one from about 8 years ago, someone talking about a mate who'd gone camping in that area and never come back. It didn't get much attention. Most of the replies suggested he just got lost or had an accident. Another one mentioned a car being found abandoned near a forest track. No sign of the owner, no follow-up. Individually, they didn't mean much. But together, they started forming something, a pattern. My chest tightened slightly as I scrolled further. There were more. Not loads, not enough to make headlines, but enough, scattered, disconnected, easy to dismiss on their own. But when you lined them up, they all pointed the same kind of place, remote, quiet, unmarked. I leaned back slightly, staring at the screen. "This isn't just me," I said under my breath. The words felt heavy, real, because now it wasn't just something that had happened to me. It was something that had happened before. I kept digging. Hours passed without me noticing properly. The light outside faded, the room dimming gradually until I had to switch a lamp on, but I barely registered it. I found an old article from a local paper, years back, about a search effort in Kielder. A man had gone missing during a solo camping trip. They'd found his gear eventually, scattered near a wooded area. But not him, no explanation. Case closed after a few weeks. Another mentioned different year, similar story, different name, same outcome, missing no trace. I felt that same cold feeling creeping back in because it wasn't random. It wasn't just people getting lost, too much overlap, too many similarities. And then I found something that made my stomach drop. A forum post, older than the others, locked now, no replies allowed. The title was simple. Strange encounter near Blackthorn Mere. My fingers hesitated over the trackpad for a second. Then I clicked it. The post was long, messy, written in that rushed, uneven way people use when they're trying to get something down before they lose their nerve. I skimmed it at first, then slowed down, because the details, they matched. Too closely, the clearing, the silence. A man approaching, friendly at first, then off. Too interested, asking if they were alone. My chest tightened. The post described being invited to see something deeper in the woods. A structure. Old, hidden. My stomach dropped further. The writer said they'd followed, just a short distance. Then something had felt wrong. They turned back, left, drove away, didn't go back. The last line stuck with me. I don't think he was alone. I stared at the screen for a long time after reading that. Because it wasn't just similar, it was almost identical. Same approach, same method, same system. I leaned back slowly, my mind racing now. This wasn't random. This wasn't a group of people just wandering around the forest. This was organized, deliberate. They found people, spoke to them, tested them, watched how they reacted. And then, depending on what they saw, they decided what to do next. A cold realization settled in. I hadn't just been unlucky. I'd been chosen. The thought made my chest tighten. I closed the laptop halfway, then opened it again immediately, because something else had just clicked. The phone, the one I'd given to the police. If that belonged to someone else, someone who hadn't made it out, then that meant I swallowed hard. It meant I wasn't just dealing with people who scared others. I was dealing with people who I didn't finish the thought, didn't want to. But it was there, clear enough. I sat there in silence for a while, the room feeling smaller again, more enclosed, more like the forest than it should have. And then a sound, soft, sharp, from somewhere in the flat. I froze. It wasn't loud, just a faint click, like something shifting. I turned my head slowly, scanning the room. Nothing moved. The lamp hummed faintly, the fridge buzzed. Everything looked normal. But my body, it didn't relax, because something felt off. Again, that same feeling from the forest, that same sense that I wasn't alone. I swallowed hard and stood up slowly, my eyes moving toward the hallway. The door was still locked. I knew it was. I checked it twice, but now I wasn't so sure. I took a step forward, then another, each one slow, careful. The floor creaked slightly under my weight, too loud, too exposed. I reached the hallway and stopped, staring at the front door. Closed, still, exactly as I'd left it. But something caught my eye. Near the bottom, just above the floor, a faint line, thin, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it. I crouched down slowly, my breath catching slightly, and that's when I saw it. A small strip of reflective tape, wedged into the gap beneath the door, just enough to be visible from the inside. My chest tightened instantly. No, that hadn't been there before. It couldn't have been. I would have seen it. I would have noticed. But it was there, now, placed, deliberately. A cold wave of understanding moved through me. They hadn't just been watching in the forest. They hadn't just been out there. Somehow, some way, they'd followed me, found me, and now they knew exactly where I lived. I backed away slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears, because that meant everything I thought was over wasn't, not even close. And whatever I'd walked away from that morning, it hadn't let me go. Not really, not at all. I didn't touch the tape. I just stared at it. That thin strip wedged under the door like it belonged there, like it had always been part of the flat and I'd only just noticed. But I knew it hadn't been. I knew every inch of that doorway, every scuff, every scratch, and that wasn't one of them. Someone had put it there, recently, carefully, and the worst part was I hadn't heard them do it. My throat felt tight. I backed away slowly, my eyes still fixed on the door like it might move if I looked away for too long. My mind was racing now, trying to catch up, trying to force everything into some kind of explanation that didn't end badly. It could have been earlier. It could have been there when you got back. You just didn't notice. But that didn't hold, because I would have noticed. I always notice things like that, especially now, especially after everything, which meant it had been placed there after I got home, after I locked the door, after I'd convinced myself I was safe. A sharp, cold panic moved through me. I turned quickly and crossed the room, heading straight for the kitchen without fully thinking it through. My hands were already moving before my brain caught up, pulling open the drawer, grabbing the first thing I could use, a knife. Not because I thought I'd actually use it, but because I needed something, something solid, something that made me feel like I wasn't completely exposed. I stood there for a second, gripping it tighter than I meant to, listening again. Nothing. The flat was silent, too silent. I moved back toward the hallway slowly, every step measured, controlled. My eyes never left the door. The strip of tape seemed brighter now, catching the light from the lamp behind me, impossible to ignore. I crouched again, closer this time, the knife still in my hand. Up close, I could see how precisely it had been placed. Not shoved in, not careless. It had been pushed just far enough that it held in place without falling through. Like a marker, like something meant to be seen, or something meant to show that someone could do it. I reached out, hesitated, then pulled it free. It came away easily, too easily. I turned it over in my hand, same as the ones in the forest. Same clean cut, same reflective surface. My chest tightened again. This wasn't coincidence. This was a message. And I didn't understand it, not fully, but I knew one thing. They were still playing the same game, just in a different place. I stood up quickly and locked the door again, even though I knew it was already locked. Then I slid the chain across, then checked the handle, once, twice, 3 times. It didn't help. because locks only matter if someone's trying to get in. This felt like something else, something that didn't need to force anything. I stepped back, the knife still in my hand, and scanned the flat again. Living room, kitchen, hallway, everything exactly as it should be. But now, it all felt wrong. Like the forest had followed me back, like the silence had come with me. I moved through the flat slowly, checking every room. Bathroom, empty. Bedroom, nothing out of place. Wardrobe, clear. Under the bed, clear. Everywhere I looked, nothing. But that didn't make it better. If anything, it made it worse. Because if someone had been inside, if they'd placed that tape, then they'd either left already, or they'd never needed to come in at all. I returned to the living room and stood there, not quite sure what to do next. Call the police again? Tell them someone had been at my door? Left tape? It sounded weak, insignificant, compared to everything else. And I already knew how that conversation would go. Careful, measured, skeptical. I exhaled slowly and set the knife down on the table, though I kept it within reach. Then I sat for a few seconds, then stood again, then paced, back and forth across the room, my thoughts spiraling. They knew where I lived. That was the part I couldn't get past. How? I hadn't told anyone, not properly, not in a way that would lead them here. Unless the police station, the phone, something there. No, that didn't make sense either. Not this quickly, not like this, which left one option I didn't want to think about. They'd followed me from the forest all the way back. My stomach turned. I crossed to the window without thinking and pulled the curtain aside slightly, just enough to look out. The street looked normal. Quiet, a couple of cars parked, no one standing around, no movement. But as I watched, something caught my eye. Across the road, parked slightly further down, a dark estate car, engine off, windows tinted. I frowned slightly. It hadn't been there earlier, or maybe it had. I couldn't be sure. That uncertainty made it worse. I stared at it for a few seconds longer. Nothing moved inside. No sign of anyone. Just a car. Parked. Normal. I let the curtain fall back into place. "You're spiraling," I muttered to myself. But the words didn't stick, because everything lined up too well. The forest, the tape, the timing. I turned away from the window and picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I dialed. It rang once, twice, then connected. "Police," the voice. "Hi," I said quickly, my voice tight. "I was there earlier, about the report. Something else has happened." There was a pause. Then, "All right, can you explain what's going on?" I glanced toward the door again. "The tape," I said. "The same tape I mentioned, the markers in the woods. Someone's just put it under my door. I didn't hear anything. I don't know how long it's been there." Another pause. Longer this time. "Is there any sign of forced entry?" the voice asked. "No," I said. "That's the point. There wasn't. It's just there." "Okay," they said. "Stay inside. Keep your doors locked. We can send someone out to take a look." Relief flickered briefly. "Please. It might take a bit of time," they added. "We've got limited units available at the moment." "Of course." "All right," I said. "We'll log it," they continued. "If anything changes, call back immediately." Yeah, the call ended. I lowered the phone slowly. It might take a bit of time. I didn't like that. Not at all. I stood there for a moment, listening again. Waiting for anything. A knock, footsteps, movement. But there was nothing. Just that same quiet, that same stillness. I moved back to the table and picked the knife up again, holding it loosely this time. Then I sat, facing the door, watching it. Minutes passed, then more. The light outside shifted, dimming slowly as evening crept in. The flat grew darker, the shadows longer. And still, no one came. No knock, no sirens, no sign of anyone at all. I glanced at the clock. Too much time had passed. They should have been here by now. Unless they weren't coming. That thought settled in heavily, because if they weren't, then I was on my own. Again, I shifted slightly in the chair, my grip tightening on the knife, and that's when I heard it. A sound from outside, soft, close, right by the door. I froze instantly, every muscle locked. The sound came again, a faint scrape, like something being dragged lightly across the surface. My eyes snapped to the bottom of the door, the gap where the tape had been. And slowly, very slowly, something began to slide into view. Another strip, reflective, pushed carefully under the door from the outside. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move, couldn't. I just watched as it inched forward, then stopped, half in, half out. A silent message, clear, deliberate. They were there, right outside. And this time, they weren't just watching. They were letting me know it. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that second strip of tape. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt longer. Because once it stopped moving, once it just sat there half under the door, half out, everything changed. There was no more doubt, no more trying to explain it away. They were outside, right there, close enough to touch the door, close enough to hear me if I spoke, close enough to come in if they wanted to. My grip tightened around the knife, my knuckles going pale. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I just sat there listening, waiting for something else to happen. A knock, a voice, the handle turning, anything, but nothing came. Just silence, heavy, deliberate. I swallowed hard, my throat dry again, and leaned forward slightly in the chair. "Hello?" I said, quiet, careful. Nothing, no response, no shift in the air, no footsteps retreating, just that strip of tape catching the light faintly. I waited. 5 seconds, 10, still nothing. A slow, creeping anger started to push through the fear. Not enough to replace it, but enough to change it. Because this wasn't just stalking. This was deliberate, calculated. They weren't trying to break in. They weren't rushing. They were playing. And I was just sitting there letting them. That thought snapped something into place. Before I could second guess it, I stood up, crossed the room, and stopped right in front of the door. Close enough now that I could see the faint shadow through the gap at the bottom, something blocking part of the light from the hallway outside. Someone was standing there. I knew it. I could feel it. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached down slowly, grabbed the strip of tape, and yanked it back inside. "Stop doing that," I said, louder now, my voice shaking but holding. "I know you're there." Silence. Then, a soft sound. Not a step, not a voice, a breath. Right on the other side of the door. My chest tightened instantly. "You've got the wrong person," I said, the words coming faster now. "I've already reported everything. The police know if you don't leave." The handle moved, just slightly, barely enough to shift, but enough. I froze, the chain held, the lock held, but that tiny movement sent a shock through me. Because it wasn't forceful, it wasn't testing the door, it was controlled, measured, like they just wanted me to know they could. I took a step back, my pulse racing again. "Leave," I said more forcefully this time. Nothing. Then a voice, quiet, low, right through the door. "You came back." Everything inside me dropped. That voice, I knew it, even through the door, even flattened and muffled. "Callum." My stomach twisted hard. "You followed me," I said, my voice tightening. A pause. Then, "No," he said calmly. "You let us." That didn't make sense. It didn't. "What are you talking about?" I snapped. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "You shouldn't have come into the trees." The words were soft, almost conversational, like he was stating something obvious, something I should already understand. "I didn't know what was out there," I said, my grip tightening on the knife again. "That didn't stop you." Something shifted in his tone. Not anger, not frustration, just fact. My chest tightened. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. Another pause. "Then, you saw too much." The answer came easily. Too easily. Like it had been decided already. My throat felt tight. "You can't just, follow people home? You think no one's gonna notice? You think this is going to—" "You left," he interrupted. That stopped me. For a second, I didn't know what to say. "You left when you weren't meant to." The words landed differently this time. Heavier. "What does that mean?" I asked, quieter now. No answer. Just silence again. Then, a second voice. Behind him. Fainter. Harder to hear. "You shouldn't be here," it said. Not to him. To me. My chest tightened again. There was more than one of them. Right outside. I took another step back, my mind racing now, trying to find a way out of this that didn't end badly. "You need to leave," I said, my voice sharper again. Now, no response, just that same presence on the other side of the door. Then the sound of something shifting. A step, then another, moving away, slowly, not rushed, not chased off, just leaving. I stood there, frozen, listening as the footsteps faded. One set, then another. Then nothing. Silence again. I didn't move for a long time after that, didn't go to the door, didn't check. I just stood there, staring at it, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, I stepped forward slowly and crouched down again, looking at the gap beneath the door. Empty. No shadow, no movement. They were gone, at least for now. I stood up again, my hands still shaking slightly, and backed away. Because something about what he'd said, it didn't sit right. "You left when you weren't meant to." That wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was a statement, like there had been an expectation, a plan, and I'd stepped outside it. That thought stayed with me, because if that was true, then whatever had been happening in those woods, it hadn't finished, not properly, and now I was part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. I glanced toward the window again without thinking. The dark estate car was still there, parked, silent, waiting. My chest tightened again, because now I knew. They hadn't come here to take me, not yet. They'd come to remind me, to make sure I understood something, that this wasn't over, that it wouldn't be, and that whatever I'd walked away from in that forest was still waiting for me to come back. The worst part was, a small, quiet thought had already started forming in the back of my mind. The kind you don't want to acknowledge, the kind that feels wrong the second it appears, but won't go away. Because if they weren't done, if there were others out there, then leaving it alone didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like avoidance. And I wasn't sure I could live with that, not knowing what was really happening, not knowing what they'd done or what they were still doing. I looked back at the door one last time, then at the tape still clutched in my hand, and that thought, it didn't fade. It grew, slow, uncomfortable, but certain. Because for the first time since I'd left the forest, I realized something. This wasn't just about getting away anymore. It was about understanding. And that meant going back, whether I wanted to or not. I didn't sleep that night either. Not properly. I stayed in the same chair for hours, knife still within reach, staring at the door long after the voices had gone. Every small sound in the flat made my chest tighten. The pipes, the building settling, someone moving in the flat above. But nothing came back to the door. They didn't knock again, didn't speak again. They'd said what they needed to say. And that was worse, because it meant there was a purpose behind it, a boundary, and I'd already crossed it once. By morning, something had shifted in me. Not the fear, it was still there, sitting just under everything, but it wasn't in control anymore. It had been replaced by something else, a need, not curiosity. Not really, something heavier. Because I couldn't sit there waiting for them to decide what happened next. I needed to know, needed to understand what that place was, what they were, before it got any worse. So I went back. The drive felt longer this time, quieter. The road stretched out in front of me, familiar but distant, like I was moving towards something I'd already been warned about and couldn't avoid anyway. The forest looked the same when I reached it. Same track, same bent post, same silence. But it didn't feel the same, because now I knew what was in it. I parked in the same place, sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing steady. Then I got out. No hesitation this time. No second guessing. I took the bag, checked my torch, made sure the knife was still there, and started toward the trees. The clearing looked untouched, exactly like before. Too clean, too normal. I didn't stop. I moved straight past it toward the edge of the forest, my eyes already scanning for the tape. It didn't take long to find it. Still there, same markers, same path, like it had been waiting. I followed it, deeper, faster this time. No hesitation, no stopping. The forest closed in again as I moved, the light fading, the air shifting, just like before. But this time, I didn't slow down. I already knew what was ahead. I just needed to reach it. The structure came into view sooner than I expected. Same as before, half buried, rusting, wrong. But now, it didn't feel hidden. It felt exposed, like I was supposed to find it again. I approached carefully, slowing slightly as I got closer, my senses sharp, picking up every small shift in the air. No footsteps, no movement, but something was different. The door. It wasn't slightly open anymore. It was wide, fully, like someone had been expecting me. My grip tightened around the knife. I stepped closer, one step, then another. The inside was darker than before, but the faint glow of that same lantern flickered deeper within, still there, still burning. They hadn't left, or they had and left it for me. I stepped through the doorway. The temperature dropped immediately, cold, still, the kind of cold that doesn't feel natural. I moved slowly now, my footsteps echoing faintly against the concrete as I followed the dim light further inside. The room opened up again, same as before. The lantern sat in the center, the items arranged around it. But now there was more. More bags, more clothing, more objects, all placed deliberately, all belonging to different people. I felt it then, fully, the weight of it. This wasn't just a place they used. This was A collection, a record, of everyone who hadn't left. My chest tightened. Hello? I said, my voice echoing slightly. It felt wrong to say it, but I needed something, anything. Silence answered me. For a second I thought I was alone. Then a sound. Behind me, footsteps, close. I spun around instantly, raising the torch, and they were there. 3 of them, blocking the doorway. Callum stood in the center, same as before, calm, still, watching. 2 others behind him, one slightly to the left, one further back in the shadows. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. You came back, Callum said quietly, same tone as before, like he'd expected it. I swallowed hard. You wanted me to, I said. A faint shift in his expression, not quite a smile, but something close. We didn't stop you. That's not the same thing. A pause. Then, no, he said, it isn't. My grip tightened. Who are you, I asked. No answer. Why are you doing this? Silence again. Then the one behind him, the woman I realized now, stepped forward slightly. You shouldn't be here, she said, same voice from before, same flat tone. I already am, I replied. Another pause. Then Callum stepped forward, just 1 step. But enough. You saw the path, he said. You followed it. I didn't know what it was. You knew it wasn't meant for you. The words hit harder than I expected, because he was right. A part of me had known, I just hadn't listened. I'm here now, I said, so tell me what this is. Another pause, longer this time. Then, this is where it ends, he said. My chest tightened. What does that mean? He didn't answer straight away. Instead, he gestured slightly around the room, at the items, the bags, the clothes. People come here, he said, alone, looking for something. His voice was calm, measured, like he'd said this before. They don't always know what they're looking for, but they come anyway. My stomach twisted. And then what? I asked. They stay. The word landed heavily. They don't leave, the woman added quietly. A cold wave moved through me. That's not your decision to make, I said, my voice tightening. No, Callum said. It isn't. Another pause. Then, they choose. That's not, I stopped myself, because I could already see it. The logic, the twisted version of it. They weren't forcing people, not directly. They were guiding, watching, waiting, letting people step into it themselves. You're insane, I said. Maybe, he replied. Then, but you came back. The words hit harder than anything else, because there was no denying it. I had, and now I was standing exactly where they'd wanted me. That realization settled in. Heavy, final. I took a slow step back, then another. My eyes flicking between them, the doorway, the space behind me. They didn't move, didn't stop me, just watched. Like before, like always. You're not gonna stop me leaving, I said. Callum tilted his head slightly. We didn't stop you last time. That wasn't an answer, not really, but it told me enough. I kept backing up, slow, careful, every step measured, waiting for them to react. They didn't, not yet. Then I reached the edge of the room, the point where I could turn, run, and the moment I shifted my weight, they moved, not fast, not rushed, but together, closing the space, not blocking me, just following. My heart slammed into overdrive. I turned and ran, back through the structure, out into the forest. Branches tore at my arms as I pushed through, the path barely visible now as panic took over again. Behind me, footsteps, not chasing, not sprinting, just keeping pace like before, like they didn't need to rush, because they already knew where this would end. And this time, I wasn't sure I could outrun it. I didn't stop running until I hit the track again. Same as before, same sudden break in the trees, the ground flattening out just enough for me to realize where I was. My legs nearly gave out when I reached it, my body finally catching up with everything I'd pushed it through. I staggered forward a few steps, then turned, half expecting to see them coming out after me. They didn't. The tree line stood still, silent, empty, like nothing had followed me at all. But I knew better now. I stood there for a second, breathing hard, trying to steady myself, trying to think clearly, get to the car. That was it. That was the only thing that mattered. I moved. Fast. Back down the track. Back to the clearing. I didn't look at the trees this time. Didn't slow down. Didn't think. I just kept moving. The clearing came into view. And the car was there. Exactly where it should be. Again. Waiting. Like it always had been. I didn't hesitate. I got in, locked the doors, started the engine. No pause. No second thoughts. Just movement. The tires slipped slightly as I pulled away, then caught, and I drove. Faster than I should have. Faster than I felt comfortable with, but I just needed distance. distance from the trees, from the structure, from them. The track blurred slightly as I drove, the branches scraping along the sides of the car, the sound sharp and grating in the silence. I didn't look back. Not this time. I kept my eyes forward, focused, until the bend came, then the road, then the forest was behind me, properly, for the first time. I didn't go back to the police. Not straight away. Not after that, because I already knew what they'd say, what they'd do. They'd go out there, look around, find nothing, or maybe find something they couldn't explain and decide not to. Either way, it wouldn't change anything. So I went home, locked the door, checked it, then checked it again. And for a while, nothing happened. No tape, no car outside, no footsteps, no voices, just silence. Normal silence, the kind I used to want. I tried to go back to normal. I really did. Work, sleep, routine, but it didn't stick. Because once you've seen something like that, once you've stood in a place like that, it doesn't just go away. It stays in the quiet moments, in the gaps between things, in the way you start noticing details you never used to care about. Like how often someone walks past your window, like whether a car's been parked in the same spot for too long, like whether the street feels just a bit too still at night. I started checking things more. Doors, windows, locks, more than I ever had before. Every sound meant something now, every shadow, every movement. And sometimes, late at night, I think I heard it again. That whistle, faint, distant, probably nothing, probably. But I'd still sit up, listen, wait, just in case. A few weeks passed before anything else happened. Long enough that I almost convinced myself it was over. Almost. Then the envelope came. No stamp, no return address. Just my name on the front, written neatly, carefully. I stood there in the hallway for a while before opening it. Something in me already knew. I just didn't want to confirm it. But eventually, I did. Inside was a single photograph, printed, grainy, taken from a distance. I didn't need to look closely to recognize it. The clearing, the mirror, the spot where I'd pitched my tent. But this time, the angle was different, higher, further back, like it had been taken from deeper in the trees. I stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, I noticed something else. A small circle, drawn in pen, around a shape near the edge of the image. My chest tightened because I recognized it. It was me, standing there, right at the start, before anything had happened, before I'd even realized anyone else was there. I looked closer, and that's when I saw it. Something else, just outside the circle, partially hidden in the shadows. Another figure standing behind me, closer than before, closer than the one on the phone. So close, it could have reached out, touched me, and I never would have known. My hand started shaking slightly, because that meant that wasn't the first photo, and probably not the last. I turned the picture over slowly. There was something written on the back, just a few words. Same neat handwriting, simple, clear. You left twice. I stared at it, my chest tightening, because I understood what that meant. I hadn't escaped. Not really, I just stepped out of something, twice. And both times, they'd let me. That wasn't luck. That wasn't chance. That was choice. Theirs, not mine. I lowered the photo slowly, my mind racing, because if that was true, if they were still watching, still waiting, then this wasn't over. Not even close. I moved to the window without thinking, pulling the curtain aside slightly. The street looked normal, empty, quiet. But now, that didn't mean anything because I knew better than that. I let the curtain fall back into place and stepped away, the photo still in my hand, the message still clear in my mind. You left twice, which meant there might not be a third time, and somewhere out there, beyond the road, beyond the trees, that place, that path, that structure, it was still there, waiting for someone else, or for me to come back. The worst part is I don't think they're worried about whether I will, because they already know something I'm still trying not to admit. Once you've seen it, once you understand even a part of it, you don't just walk away, not completely. A part of you stays out there in the quiet, in the dark, and sooner or later, that part starts pulling you back. Not fast, not all at once, just enough, until one day, you realize you're thinking about it again, wondering, questioning, and then without even meaning to, you're already on your way back. Because whatever's out there, it doesn't chase you, it doesn't force you, it just waits, and eventually you go to it, on your own. If this story stirred something within you, be it a flicker of unease, curiosity, or deep reflection, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. What do you think is truly going on? Have you ever experienced a sense of uncanny familiarity like that before? If you have similar stories of your own, don't hesitate to share them. Who knows? Maybe we are all touching upon the same hidden frequency. And if you want to keep exploring these dramatic, mysterious, and multi-layered tales, please hit the like button to support the channel and subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming chapters. Wishing you a truly peaceful night, where everything is still in the gentlest way, and may there always be a spark of warm light somewhere waiting for you to find it.